the Northern Isles and the Western Isles. That brisk breeze lingers through Friday evening and into the weekend as well. We'll also see the wind picking up along the south coast of England. So that'll be a feature of the weather through Saturday, but look at that. Sunny skies almost across the board. By Sunday, just the threat of a few showers coming up across the south.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to a 2-hour bumper edition of The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood. Now, I'll be joined in the studio today by my political panel. Today, we have Director of Studies at the Henry Jackson Society, Sam Ashworth-Hayes, and former Labour advisor, Scarlett Maguire. Now, as the war in Ukraine enters its third week, we look at what happens next. Also, the cost of living crisis, the online harms bill, and everything that matters to us here at home too. Our money, our freedom, all that to come. But first, here are the latest headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 2 o'clock. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. P&O Ferries have confirmed 800 staff will be made redundant in a bid to save the company, which lost around £100 million last year. It's after all services were suspended this morning. Well, we can cross now to GB News Yorkshire and Humber reporter Anna Riley, who's in Hull. And Anna, a big announcement by P&O today. What more can you tell us about this?
Yeah, a huge announcement that's been made that 800 seafarers have lost their jobs with immediate notice. The company have said that they are going to compensate staff for that, but the staff just aren't happy, and neither are the unions. And staff here actually in this ferry behind me are launching a sit-in. They're refusing to move. They're set to be replaced with agency staff that are waiting on buses outside the port to get onto the ship. But staff on board this ferry have stayed aboard. They're saying they're not going to move until more terms are discussed. We know as well that P&O Ferries have tweeted that services may not be able to run for the next few days. They're advising passengers not to travel unless it's essential, and they're trying to put on alternative ferries with other providers for passengers that are turning up and expecting to go on these P&O ferries. And as we have more on this story, we will bring it to you. OK, Anna, thank you very much for the update. Anna Riley there in Hull.
The UK says it will deploy its medium-range anti-air missile system to Poland as NATO moves to increase security along its eastern flank. During a visit to Warsaw, the Defence Minister, Ben Wallace, also confirmed Britain will be deploying 100 troops to the country. It comes as Ukrainian authorities say survivors are emerging after a Russian airstrike hit a theatre sheltering hundreds of civilians. Moscow has denied its involvement in the shelling.
I hope this sends a message to the Kremlin that don't doubt us for 1 second, that we will stand together, stand up for our values and defend our friends such as Poland from any further aggression.
The Kremlin says it will disregard the UN's International Court of Justice demand that Russia halt its aggression. Moscow says talks with Ukraine are continuing today via video link. It says NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg urged President Putin to pull back his forces to avoid more bloodshed.
NATO has a responsibility to prevent this conflict from escalating further. That would be even more dangerous and would cause more suffering, death and destruction.
The Ministry of Defence says the Russian invasion of Ukraine has largely stalled on all fronts. The latest intelligence update shows Russian forces have made minimal progress on land, sea and air and continue to suffer heavy losses. It adds the vast majority of Ukrainian territory, including all major cities, remains in Ukrainian hands. The Bank of England has raised interest rates from 0.5% to 0.75%. It comes ahead of an inflation hike expected next month, estimated to reach around 8%, which the bank warns could peak even higher later in the year. It was already set to be the biggest rise in 30 years. The British-Iranian charity worker Nazanin Zagari Ratcliffe has been reunited with her family in the UK. The 43-year-old was released from detention in Iran, where she'd been held for 6 years. Fellow British-Iranian Anousheh Ashuri was also released after being detained for nearly 5 years. Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng told GBNews he's delighted she finally has her freedom back.
It does show that diplomacy can work. I think we worked very, very hard. The Foreign Office worked very hard. Liz Truss, I think, worked very hard. But beyond all of that, what she went through, I think, is unimaginable. I mean, to be in a prison in Iran, not knowing whether you'll ever be released, it must be an extraordinary thing that she suffered, and I'm delighted that she's back.
The BBC says it's reached a substantial settlement with Diana, Princess of Wales's private secretary, Patrick Jephson. The broadcaster says it acknowledges serious harm was caused to Commander Jephson as a result of the Martin Bashir Panorama interview in 1995. It says it apologises unreservedly to the commander and has paid a substantial sum in damages. And to the Manor-born star, Peter Bowles has died aged 85. The actor played villains in several TV series, including The Avengers, becoming a household name as the archetypal English gent. But it was with a moustache, alongside Dame Penelope Keith, that he became most famous for. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens, of course. Now, let's return to the briefing with Tom Harwood.
Hello and welcome to the programme. Coming up on this hour on The Briefing, evidence of yet more Russian atrocities in Ukraine, the bombing of a shelter for children and the machine gun murder of civilians in a queue for bread. We'll ask how much longer will these horrors continue. Also, with suggestions that inflation is likely to rise to 8.3% by next month, we discuss what this means for you and the cost of living crisis. And should there be a cap on earnings for MPs with and all the other issues in today's show, email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now. Well, in the last few weeks, in terms of geopolitics, it has been extraordinary. However, Vladimir Putin's speech to his nation last night was extraordinary to behold, beyond even the deluded ramblings of a typical James Bond villain. Speaking from the Kremlin, Putin said, quote, "It was possible that the pro-Nazi regime in Kiev could have got its hands on weapons of mass destruction, and its targets, of course, would have been Russia. Putin maintains the ludicrous fantasy that Ukraine's government are Nazis bent on committing genocide against Russian speakers. President Zelensky, of course, is a liberal politician of Jewish heritage, about as far from a Nazi as you can possibly get. What we saw last night was a Russian president who is flailing. His, quote, special military operation in Ukraine is floundering. The Russian soldiers he sent to kill women and children are being gunned down by the thousands. Putin said his country was ready to discuss a neutral status for Ukraine in peace talks. If we take him at his word, although why would we, Putin could now be looking for a way out. With no speedy victory and a logistical nightmare, he's now worried about the effect of sanctions imposed by the entire Western world. He knows that they will cause economic pain and potentially social unrest. Putin spoke about inflation and unemployment rising. He knows he needs a scapegoat when the economic reality bites, and that is the West. His scapegoat has always been the West. Well, last night he spoke about Western traitors operating in Russia. He described Russians living abroad as enemies of the people. His was a rambling speech, no doubt a sign of increasing desperation within the walls of the Kremlin. And far from the strongman image he has sought, his were the words of a madman. Well, let's kick off today's show by bringing in Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown MP, who can join us live from Westminster. Welcome to the programme. First of all, I want to get your reaction to the announcement from Ben Wallace today, of course, providing Poland with Sky Sabre missiles. In your view, do you think this means the British government is genuinely worried about Russians incurring upon Polish airspace?
What I think we're doing is to send a very strong signal to President Putin that if he does have the audacity to try and attack any NATO country, he can expect the full force of a NATO response. And we're making that very clear by sending additional soldiers to Latvia, to additional resources to Poland. And I think that is exactly the right thing to do.
So this is a show of strength, really. Potentially, in the old words of President Ronald Reagan of the United States, speak softly, but carry a big stick. Hopefully not wanting to use those armaments, those missiles, those reinforcements that we're putting in the area, but showing Mr. Putin that we mean business.
That's exactly right. And I think it's much better to do it at this stage while Mr. Putin is contemplating what his next moves are. And hopefully we can actually prevent a complete destruction of Ukraine. But I am fairly pessimistic about that. But your report makes very clear that this shelter that was containing large numbers of children was probably targeted by Russian military sources. And I think every time Putin's forces commit an atrocity like that, it reignites determination of the West that we've got to withstand this whole, in every way we can, we've got to withstand what Putin's doing, these atrocities that he's committing in Ukraine against their people.
It's fascinating to look at these sort of tactics. I can't imagine why the Russian army would think that targeting civilians in the way that it appears they have been would be advantageous for them. Clearly trying to break the morale of the Ukrainian people, a very high morale, but potentially they're performing actions that could be counterproductive, almost uniting the Ukrainian people and the Western world against them.
I think that's exactly right, Tom. I think he thinks that he's going to break the morale of the Ukrainian people. This sort of capturing of mayors, shelling children is all sort of designed to depress the Ukrainian population. Actually, I think it'll do the reverse. I think it'll make them even more determined to fight and defend their country. And I think even if he gets control of most of the cities, he's still going to find he's going to need large numbers of troops to maintain law and order in that country. So I think he has a much bigger task ahead of him than he ever possibly imagined when he first launched this attack on Ukraine.
What do you make of the Russian president calling Russians who are living elsewhere, Russians who are speaking out against his regime perhaps, as traitors?
Well, this is a mark of somebody who, when they're not getting their own way, and he, after all, has been used to getting his way in the entire time that he's been president, terrorizing his own people, terrorizing other nations, such as Chechnya and taking bits of Georgia and so on. This president has been used to getting his way. He's not getting his way entirely with this Ukrainian campaign, and therefore he's lashing out at anywhere he can possibly think that he can blame. And I think it's extraordinary. I mean, we're very happy to have our people round the globe in this country because they're good ambassadors for the country and they're bringing business into this country.
It is extraordinary to see the effect that the sanctions are already having on the Russian economy. Not being able to use Apple Pay, not being able to use credit cards. Many shops and restaurants that have come to be common in Russia over the last 20 years closing their doors as well. At what point might the Russian people blame the Putin regime for this? Or is there a risk that actually this strengthens the resolve of Russia? According to most opinion polls, President Putin is still bizarrely fairly popular there, of course, feeding his population a sordid soup of lies to maintain his position. But still, it does seem to be being eaten up by the Russian people as things stand.
Well, I think the longer this whole campaign goes on in Ukraine, the more the ordinary Russian people will begin to twig that actually what Putin's doing in their name is wholly disadvantageous to them. It will make their country poorer, therefore their own lives will be poorer in every respect. And you know, even in this day and age, where people can have mobile phones, they do get, whatever Putin does to block the internet in Russia, they do get messages through. They do understand what's going on in Ukraine. And I think they will gradually get more and more fed up with their own president. Now, how that translates into pressure on him, I think is somewhat difficult to predict. But what we do know is now that having sanctioned in this country over 1,000 individuals who are key businessmen and thinkers and members of parliament in the Duma in Russia, they will all begin to feel this pressure that we're putting on their country. And I think collectively they will begin to put pressure on Putin. How long that will take to work is hard to know. But he must be, to make a speech like he did, like you featured, Tom, on public yesterday, he must be feeling the pressure, I have no doubt.
Certainly. Just finally in this conversation, Sir Geoffrey, President Zelensky spoke to the German parliament, whereby he was thankful for what they were doing and certainly cancelling Nord Stream 2, those sanctions. Not many people thought the Germans would go that far, but he also seemed to level a little bit of criticism at the Germans for not moving fast enough, for only arriving at this position latterly. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that I can understand why he's doing what he's doing, because he wants to put the maximum pressure on President Schulz, who I think we should congratulate, as you say, stopping Nord Stream 2, providing a huge increase in the military budget. But there's no doubt about it, the Germans could go further and faster, blocking some of the Russian oil and gas, and that's what he was inevitably trying to do. But I think it's important that we all of us, all the Western nations who stick together and work out plans together to put out maximum pressure on Russia. And I think over a period of time, that will have an effect.
Well, Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, thank you very much for that analysis and for joining us here on the briefing this afternoon. Let's hope that the Western world can stick together and, as you say, that has an effect on the situation in Russia. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Tom, very much.
Well, now let's get some reaction from today's panel. Both Sam Ashworth-Hayes and Scarlett Maguire were listening to all of that. Let's turn first to you, Scarlett. Welcome to the programme.
Good morning. Hi.
First of all, this watchword, Western unity. It's been more than anyone has expected, certainly over the last 3 weeks. Although there have been sort of cracks that have slightly appeared. How long can Western unity last?
I think actually a lot. I think it's got much stronger because what people are really worried about in every country in Europe is what does Vladimir Putin do next? Is it really is he going to finish with Ukraine, or is he going to try and go somewhere else if they don't stop him? How dangerous is it for Poland, for Moldova, for those countries? And so, and also, how much did we cause it by not doing enough? By not doing enough since 2014, by not taking Crimea seriously, that actually we allowed him to build up. And it is a bit like, you know, the Second World War, where Hitler was actually allowed to do things. So, I mean, there's no question. I mean, when you and Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown talked about the pain of the Russians, there's going to be pain in the West. I mean, for ordinary people like us, you know, there's cost of living increases, fuel shortages. I mean, it's not going to be fun, but actually it'll be worse if Putin is allowed to just run riot. And I think the other reason for everybody staying together is the amazement at what the Ukrainians are doing. I mean, you know, if they can do that, we can do something too.
Well, let's turn that to Sam Ushworth-Hayes now. I mean, the Ukrainian spirit has been more than most people expected as well. Most people were expecting in the first week the Russians to be able to swoop in to the capital, to Kiev, and take that for Putin. He hasn't been able to.
No, he hasn't. And the Ukrainian armed forces have put up a very credible showing. I think it's worth saying the idea that the Russians were going to arrive, take this airfield and overthrow Kiev in a couple of days, I think is one which has been advanced perhaps more by the Russians than by sort of more serious analysts in the West. I think there was a degree of optimism about how this would go for the Russian side, which is obviously not being carried out. And they obviously also underestimated the degree to which the West would rearm the Ukrainians, give them the supplies of ammunition and weapons they need to fight this off. So they have found themselves embroiled in a conflict which was probably of a larger scale than they thought it would be.
And on Scarlett's point of appeasement, was it how the West reacted in 2014? How countries across the world sort of shrugged, yes, there were some sanctions, but nothing like what we're seeing now against Putin's Russia. Was how the West collectively reacted to the snatching of Crimea in 2014? Has that exacerbated this?
I think you can actually go even further back and say, you know, the real mistake was 2008, when we made this offer of a potential future membership action plan for Ukraine and Georgia, and Putin sent his force into Georgia to basically make sure that wouldn't happen there. And Dmitry Medvedev, who was the president, then gave a speech saying, well, look, if we hadn't done this, Georgia would now be in NATO, so well done you guys, we've shown military force works. We saw this happen, and then knowing that Ukraine was in a similar situation, sat back, and then 2014, Putin rolls into Ukraine. Again, we sit back. And over the last couple of years, we've made an effort to rearm Ukraine, to give them the military supplies they need, to give them the training they need, but nowhere near on the scale needs to dissuade an invasion of this size. And if the spirit and willingness and the resources we poured in recently had been done earlier, there was a question about whether this war perhaps would have happened.
And Scarlett, just finally in this section, have we been therefore too naive since the fall of the Berlin Wall, since the era of good feeling amongst the West? Did we sort of neglect?
I think our naivety was with Putin. I mean, I think when the wall came down, that actually, if anything, we did the opposite. Is we were too triumphalist. We said, we've won, we'll do all of this. And actually, Russia did feel besieged. There was absolutely no question that us saying, oh well, why don't we put all these people in NATO? You know, the Baltics in NATO frightened them, right? But once Putin got in, there was absolutely no question. I mean, look, when the Skripals they tried to assassinate them in Salisbury, and we said sanction, 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 and then we had Gazprom at the stock exchange within weeks. Putin didn't take us seriously because we didn't behave seriously.
Well, it's certainly a theme that we're going to be recurring to and coming back up to later in the show as well. But coming up after the break, we'll be crossing over to Kiev itself with the latest as Russian forces ground to a halt outside the city. But before that, let's look at the weather.
Hello again. Spring sunshine to come for all of us over the next few days. Today, not everywhere seeing sunny skies, but we do have plenty of it, certainly across the south but in that sunshine it feels quite mild. Further north we do have some showers around, low pressure and some weather fronts, but in the south this high pressure is building in, bringing, as I say, a sunny day, certainly across much of southern England and to eastern England too. Further north we're having more clouds and some showers over northern England, North Wales, maybe one or two drifting into southeast Wales and the Midlands. Certainly plenty of showers coming into Scotland, Northern Ireland, mostly of rain, but some snow over the hills across the Highlands. Not too many showers this afternoon for Northern Ireland. Mostly dry and bright here. And temperatures here in Belfast, Glasgow, up to 10 or 11, but further south, 14, 15, maybe 16 degrees Celsius in that sunshine. Through the evening and overnight, we'll see those showers fading over northern England. We'll keep some going over the extreme northwest of Scotland, but otherwise a dry night and a clear night largely. But certainly across the Midlands, parts of Wales, southern England, some mist and fog patches are likely to form. Further north, it's likely to stay clear, and we are going to see a frost. A cold start wherever you are then to Friday, and there will be some perhaps quite dense patches of fog through the morning rush hour. Could take a couple of hours before that clears away completely, but it should eventually go. Certainly by late morning it's looking largely dry and sunny. Sunshine fairly hazy at times over northern Scotland, but for most places it's a cracking day if you like spring sunshine. Temperatures getting widely into the teens, 16, 17 Celsius is possible. Cooler with a brisk breeze across the Northern Isles and the Western Isles. That brisk breeze lingers through Friday evening and into the weekend as well. We'll also see the wind picking up along the south coast of England. So that'll be a feature of the weather through Saturday, but look at that. Sunny skies almost across the board. By Sunday, just the threat of a few showers coming up across the south.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
Right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the programme. Well, earlier today, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the German Bundestag, declaring that whilst he welcomed the help from Germany, it had come too late. This comes, however, as Russia's offensive around the capital city of Kyiv appears to have largely stalled, despite the regular bombing of residential areas in the capital. Well, we can now cross over to Kyiv, where I'm joined by Kira Rudik, a Ukrainian Member of Parliament. Welcome to the programme. Thank you so much for making time for us here. Of course, we know that your city is under some pretty ghastly bombardment. First of all, can you just update us on the latest from Kyiv?
So we today are off the 35-hour curfew. that was established so that the city can be ready to a possible Russian attack on the city. The attack didn't quite happen as Russians planned, and it was pushed back on the outskirts of the city, where they were trying to attack from all the directions simultaneously. Russians had 3 plans. The first, to attack from the ground, where we are ready and we are fighting them back, same way that we are fighting them back on every other different direction and location. Second is to close the entrance and exits and to siege the city. And we are ready to that as well, because we have enough food and water and storage of supplies, so they will not be able to starve us out like they are doing it in Mariupol. And the third way, obviously, is to bombard the city from the air. And here they were quite successful, because at least 4 buildings and half of a subway station were destroyed during the last 2 days. This is why we continuously keep asking for a no-fly zone or something similar, so we can protect ourselves from the air. There is nothing that I, as a citizen, can do to protect the city from the air. I can help out to make sure that our army is strong and we are fighting Russians on the ground. I can help out and create the logistics for the storage so we are not starved, but there is nothing that can be done for us to protect us from the air, and this is why we are asking for help.
It's so interesting, this discussion. Of course, President Zelensky, when he addressed the United Kingdom Parliament just a few days ago, he echoed that call, asking for help in the sky. Now, from Britain's perspective, the United Kingdom is providing now Starstreak missiles, surface-to-air missiles that hone in on Russian jets. I suppose, to some extent, that's trying to deal with the problem in the sky, but without crossing that red line that I suppose so many Western countries have unanimously agreed upon, which is NATO forces not firing directly upon Russian jets.
Right, and on that matter, we are super grateful for all the support that we are getting. And the Starstreaks that you have mentioned, they are a significant support for us. They are the support that we need. My question is wider right now. Like, what is the plan? My country has the plan. My people do have the plan. We plan to stand till the last person standing. And we plan to fight Russians so they all are in Ukrainian soil. Russia's plan also is obvious. Russians plan to build Russian empire or whatever medieval thing that they have in their mind. The question is, what is NATO's plan? Because if we don't get this additional heavy weaponry, we will not be able to fight Russians back to where they came from. And that creates like this ongoing conflict. So my question is like, what is the plan then? Because we are ready to fight and we will be fighting. But for the war to actually end with Ukraine's victory, we will need more supplies and we will need more support.
It's heart-wrenching because, of course, I can totally understand the idea that NATO troops are building up in all of these bordering countries, but simply will not put a toe cap over the line across into Ukraine. They do not want to risk that sort of potentially nuclear level conflict between NATO and Russia. I wonder, when it comes to what the Russians have been doing, clearly the Russians have stalled. Clearly Putin's plan has not gone entirely as he was wishing. What is your sense in terms of what happens next? What does Putin want to achieve here if he can't have total victory over Ukraine?
First of all, he will try to achieve any kind of victory. Right now, he is just simply bombarding the civilian places. He is trying to kill as many Ukrainians as possible with the bombarding. And you probably heard that yesterday they threw a bomb into the Mariupol theater where it was a shelter for women and children, and there were around 1,000 people there. We are still waiting to learn if people survived there. So he is just committing all the crimes all the war crimes that possible. That's why Biden called him a war criminal. This is why he just goes full throttle, hoping that the world that he will have like a better negotiation position. But the question that I'm having again is that we already see that there is no point in negotiating with Putin, and there is no point of making the deal with Putin because there is no force to make him execute on this deal. There is no way to have a proof or guarantee that he will then not change his mind like he has done in the past many times. So right now what we see is we have a fantastic opportunity right now while he did not get more of the soldiers into Ukraine and we are fighting him on every single inch of our land. We have a fantastic opportunity to actually fight him back, actually to win, actually to push him to get him off Ukrainian soil. But for that we would need more help. And I know that we have received a tremendous amount of support, but we are fighting against the third largest army in the world right now. We, as the army that is much smaller, that with less equipment, with less of supplies, but we are fighting it, and we see that we can win because of the morale, because of the motivation, because of the impulse that is here right now. This is why these next days they will be critical. Putin is not able to take over Kiev or any other larger city, so he may try to establish so-called separate republic, as he was trying to do in Kherson, in the captured city of Kherson. So they were pressuring the local council onto voting for a separate republic of Kherson or something. So I'm proud of the members of the local council who refused to do that. But Putin is trying to to get anything, something of it, and getting very angry and then unfortunately killing Ukrainians.
It's a horrendous situation, but my gosh, the David versus Goliath struggle that seems to be going on right now, the Ukrainian morale in the face of the weight of the Russian army is incredible. Looking at those numbers of casualties that have been imposed upon Russia, there seems to be light at the end of the tunnel, even though that tunnel may be long and may be dark. Kira Rudik, Ukrainian Member of Parliament, thank you so much for making time for us this afternoon to talk through an incredibly difficult moment for your people.
Thank you, and glory to Ukraine.
Slava Ukraini.
Heroям slava.
Well, coming up after the break, we'll be discussing the government's U-turn on the crackdown on second jobs for MPs, and also if MPs' second jobs' wages should be capped. But first, let's catch up with the latest GB News headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 2:34. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. P&O Ferries has confirmed 800 staff have been made redundant with immediate effect in a bid to save the company, which lost around £100 million last year. The company says services are unable to run in the coming few days and that in its current state, it's not a viable business. The Bank of England has raised interest rates from 0.5% to 0.75%. It comes ahead of an inflation hike expected next month, estimated to reach around 8%, which the bank warns could peak even higher later in the year. The UK says it will deploy its medium-range anti-air missile system to Poland as NATO moves to increase security along its eastern flank. During a visit to Warsaw, the Defence Minister, Ben Wallace, also confirmed Britain would be deploying 100 troops to the country. It comes as Ukrainian authorities say survivors are emerging after a Russian airstrike hit a theatre sheltering hundreds of civilians.
I hope this sends a Kremlin that don't doubt us for 1 second, that we will stand together, stand up for our values and defend our friends such as Poland from any further aggression.
The Kremlin says it will disregard the International Court of Justice demand that Russia halt its aggression. Moscow says talks with Ukraine are continuing today via video link. It's as NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg urged President Putin to pull back his forces to avoid more bloodshed. The BBC says it's reached a substantial settlement with the private secretary of Diana, Princess of Wales. The broadcaster says it acknowledges serious harm was caused to Commander Patrick Jephson as a result of the Martin Bashir Panorama interview in 1995. It says it apologises unreservedly to the commander and has paid a substantial sum in damages. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. In just a moment, it's back to the briefing with Tom Harwood.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome back. Now, overnight it emerged that the government has dropped plans to limit MPs' earnings from second jobs over concerns that such caps on hours or pays would be, quote, impractical. Boris Johnson called for a review of MPs' outside work last year after a number of high-profile controversies. At the time, the Prime Minister backed proposals to place, quote, reasonable limits on hours spent on other jobs. Yet now these limits are not going ahead. Labour have criticised the move, saying the Prime Minister had, quote, repeatedly allowed his own MPs to put their own private business interests ahead of their constituents, and it must be stopped. Well, joining me now to discuss this from the Taxpayers Alliance is their media manager, Danielle Boxall. Welcome to the programme. I suppose, first of all, I've got a question for you, Danielle. I can see on the one hand, the Taxpayers Alliance might well be saying MPs are all awful, they've all got their snouts in the trough, they shouldn't be getting anything, they shouldn't be allowed to have outside jobs. But on the other hand, from the perspective of taxpayers, maybe you think that MPs should only have outside jobs, that being an MP shouldn't get any taxpayer funding at all, and they should find ways to get cash for themselves that isn't out of the pocket of the taxpayer. Which is it?
Well, historically, that is how it used to work. You know, MPs weren't paid for their work. But obviously now the demands of an MP have changed. A lot more people have the right to vote, so the constituency numbers are a lot higher. So I do think it's right that MPs are given a salary, but I also think it's right that they have the option to find work elsewhere if they want to. I mean, what constituent would turn down their MP if they were working part-time as a nurse or a doctor or, you know, a solicitor representing their constituents that way? So it's difficult to say what jobs are good and what jobs are bad. And I don't think we should be getting into this situation where we've got parliamentarians deciding who can do what and what jobs are good, what jobs are bad, and picking winners and losers effectively.
It is interesting because this all followed on from the most enormous scandals, whether it was the Owen Paterson affair or anything else towards the end of last year. Clearly, the public believe that MPs' pay is quite enough, and outside jobs raise an eyebrow. The fact that MPs might have outside earnings at all, taking their pay well into six figures, to many people that seems egregious.
Yeah, and I think that's that's up to them if they feel like that. And what we should be doing is we should be allowing voters to have more control, and they should have the right to recall their MPs if they want to. Perhaps by increasing the threshold to 30%, then we could say that if people feel like their MP isn't spending enough time on their constituency work and is spending too much time on outside jobs that they don't feel are really adding to the parliamentary life. Then they could recall their MP. But that system isn't in place at the moment. Instead, what we have is this system where MPs are deciding if another MP has broken the rules. MPs are deciding what the rules are. So I think it should be up to voters to decide that, which is why I think we should reform the system.
That is an actually very interesting point as to where does the buck stop? Who is the boss of an MP? And I think you make a very compelling point that actually ultimately the boss of an MP, the person who should say what they can and can't do, are the constituents of that MP. And potentially we need to move away from regulating MPs' behaviour through parliamentary committees and obscure rules and actually just give more power into the hands of constituents. Do you think that's a likely thing to go ahead?
Well, it was suggested initially after the expenses scandal. I think it was Zach Goldsmith that first came up with this idea, and it's something that we've been championing for a very long time. But it's not just, this right to recall system that we would like to see. There's a lot more things that we could do in the meantime. There's the issue of transparency, of course. At the moment, the Register of Interests is very difficult to read, so it makes it more difficult for journalists and constituents to see what their MPs are doing, if they're spending time on other jobs, what sort of gifts they're receiving, all that kind of thing. I think we should make that a lot more easier for people to read and have access to, because at the moment it's a little bit complicated and Parliament is using security concerns to make it more difficult to get through and sort of download this data and shift through it.
I suppose that is a considerable amount of your life there at the Taxpayers Alliance, looking through everything that MPs continue to claim for and continue to be gifted. What's the most extraordinary set of claims that you've seen in recent history?
Well, of course, there was the famous example on the expenses of the Duck House, which I think it even had a play named The Duck House about the expenses scandal. So I think that's stuck in people's minds for a long time. But, there are all sorts of things that MPs claim for, their expenses, they claim for licence fees, they claim for their heating, all sorts of things. So, I think we do have a very generous system which means that MPs can claim for a lot of things. Football tickets they get given, that kind of thing. But I think it is right that everybody is able to access that information and read it, and that is, it should be in the public domain.
Well, Danielle Boxall, thank you for whizzing us through those issues and potentially some suggestions for reform there to what is quite an opaque system. Danielle Boxall from the Taxpayers Alliance, thank you for joining us this afternoon. Well, let's get some reaction from today's panel now. Sam Ashworth-Hayes and Scarlett Maguire are still with me. Now, Sam Ashworth-Hayes, we were speaking a little bit in the ad break there about a proposal that you had. You think MPs are underpaid?
I do. And so my rationale for this is basically that there are some very talented people who just will not touch this job with a 10-foot pole. They get paid £82,000, £84,000 a year, I think would be the post increase, which is a very good salary by the standards on most jobs. But that's top 5% of the population. If you are going into law, into technology, into finance, into any of these fields, and you're a high flyer and you are really good at this, are you going to take a massive pay cut to go and work in Parliament in a quite hostile environment where the press are digging through your trash to find out your expenses? I would suggest you probably won't. So by setting the bar too low, you obviously make it appealing to a large number of people, but you filter out some who just won't do that. If you increase the pay slightly, you can bring in these people with these skills we need, as perhaps seen in, as we're about to be talking about, the Online Harms Bill, where perhaps some more tech-friendly legislation could have been passed. If you brought in these skills, you could increase the quality of legislation, and if you increase the quality of legislation, then you apply it over a whole country, the increase in pay would pay for itself.
That's a fascinating... So it's the idea that you'd have very, very talented people rather than what some might say the morons we have at the moment, passing legislation that could actually pay for itself in terms of generating more wealth. Scarlett, you look like you don't quite agree with that assessment.
No, I think this amazing thing of that very talented people earn lots and lots of money and won't go into Parliament. I mean, actually, we've seen very talented people go into Parliament and they don't know how to do it. I mean, that's it. Actually, being an MP is a job that you have to learn how to do it, and you have to then go into government, and then your pay goes up. The obvious person is Keir Starmer, I mean, who was a very, very successful barrister, then became Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions, and now is an MP on £85,000 a year. And he finds it fine. And I just think if that's what you want to do, and it's called public service, that's what you do. Actually, I mean, it is an awful lot of money. I just think it should be a full-time job. I mean, I think Sam and I probably agree on this, it should be it's really, really important.
Should it be a full-time job, though? Ultimately, what are you doing as an MP? If you're an MP in a marginal constituency, it's probably more of a full-time job than if you're an MP in a safe seat. As an MP, you vote on legislation, but in terms of taking up concerns of constituents, it's not a very easily definable role.
No, there's an awful lot that you can do. I mean, there's masses of casework, but I mean, you know, a lot of Conservatives have very large rural constituencies. If they serviced them properly, it would be a full-time job. And you know, your safe Labour seats, which tend to be inner city, tend to be, you know, lots of poverty, lots of problems. I mean, there is masses to do. I mean, you know, the people I know who are Labour MPs work flat out all the time. And I'm sure that there are lots of Conservative MPs like that. I mean, and Lib Dems. And actually, most MPs go in there to make a difference. And that's what it's important to remember. And by putting up the money, the other thing about high money is you just don't understand what real life is like. If you're on £84,000, you can't imagine what it's like bringing up a family on £33,000.
And a £20 uplift to universal credit doesn't sound particularly much to you, whereas it can mean an awful lot to some communities.
I mean,
but
yeah, that's terrible.
Let's turn this to Sam just in the final 30 seconds of this discussion. Sorry, it's so short. The idea that public service is what matters. You don't want people going into politics motivated by money. You want them going in motivated by a higher calling.
I think the thing about this is you can filter people out by not paying them enough. So you may have a desire to provide service to the public, but if you set your life up on the basis of your mortgage, your school fees, whatever they are, on the basis of your current income, you may not want to take a significant cut.
Well, you have marvellously fit that into time. That is a very, well, thank you for that. We're going to move on to our next topic that we can fit in for the rest of the hour now. Today, the government is to introduce its long-awaited yet controversial online safety bill in Parliament. The bill is intended to tackle a wide range of online content it describes as harmful. Now, social networks could be fined or blocked if they fail to remove this, quote, harmful content, and their bosses could be imprisoned for a lack of compliance. Now, proponents believe a much more regulated internet will be safer for people, while opponents fear that the move will stifle entrepreneurialism, free speech, and drive people to use VPNs or the dark web, as they do in countries with already widespread government control of the internet, like Russia and like China. Well, joining me now to talk through this is the Legal and Policy Officer of Big Brother Watch, the privacy campaigners, Mark Johnson. Welcome to the programme, Mark. First of all, your reaction to the legislation as we've heard about today.
Well, you will have to forgive me slightly. The bill has just been published in the last half an hour. It's 225 pages long, and I've managed to have a quick flick through it just before I came on. But what I will say is that from our first looks at the bill, it does appear to be the kind of censors charter that we feared. The legal but harmful provision does remain. It's been redrafted, but there is a specific targeting of lawful expression. And the bill still deputises Silicon Valley to act as online speech police. So there's certainly plenty to be concerned about when it comes to upholding our right to freedom of speech.
Well, I really thank you for the Herculean task of an over 200-page bill, a quick skim through and being able to talk through it, although we have heard lots about what was going into this bill over the last several months, indeed years when it was first proposed. I wonder, with this element that we've heard about a little over the last 24 hours of potential prison services for the bosses of tech companies that fail to comply, that fail to remove, quote, harmful content. Do you think that that would actually happen, or is this just a big signal, almost a bit of populism splashed into the bill? Because ultimately, most people in Britain don't really like big tech, and a government that's seen to take on big tech might be one that wins favour.
I think one of the most important things to do when looking at this bill is to think about the impression that it could give around the world, the way that we as a country lead as an example around the world. And is there anything in this bill that less democratic governments could look at and say, well, they're doing that in the UK, why can't we do it too? And I think that's one of those provisions that I just worry that as the government move in a more kind of draconian direction and they talk about jailing tech executives, less democratic countries around the world will say, hey, they're doing it, why can't we do it as well?
And I suppose the worry there, going beyond privacy and going beyond speech rights, is the issue with entrepreneurialism. We wonder why the Facebooks and the Googles and the Twitters of the world are founded in the United States of America, somewhere with a First Amendment. Well, if we're saying we're going to imprison tech bosses who fail to take down content on user-generated services, who's going to found a user-generated service here in the UK?
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, there are a few ways to look at this. I mean, one is that they're making a really, really authoritarian, really, really draconian bill to try and scare platforms into becoming more censorious, and the impact will be negative on all of our freedom of speech. The other thing is you spoke about the kind of competition element, market element to this. The regulatory costs of being able to comply with these asks mean that it will effectively entrench the power of the largest platforms. And even what the regulation says in practice, it's really cementing their terms and conditions and kind of making them quite synonymous with law. So from a kind of like competition perspective, I can see how it would be bad too. But of course, as I also said, the kind of serious criminal penalties for tech execs are really just to kind of scare companies into becoming more and more censorious.
Do people not have a right in the United Kingdom to expect, particularly under 18s, particularly children, be protected from some of the nastier elements of the internet? Yes, we can talk about a lot of the benefits that a free and open internet is, but another description of that is sort of a wild west. Anyone can stumble into anything. Is there not a good intention here in terms of protecting our children?
Where you won't find divergence between groups talking about this bill is that everybody believes that the rule of law has to be upheld online. But what we are particularly worried about is where that goes further, where there are serious threats to freedom of expression. I spoke at the start about this legal but harmful measure, and that is looking increasingly likely that it will be basically whatever the Secretary of State says is harmful is what the platforms will have to address. And also the impact on privacy as well. So it's not just about keeping people safe. It goes further than that, and it's where it really infringes on our fundamental rights. That's where we're concerned.
Well, Mark Johnson, Legal and Policy Officer at Big Brother Watch, thank you for whizzing us through the over 200 pages of that bill that got published just half an hour ago. Thank you for joining us here on The Briefing on GB News. Well, let's turn now to get some reaction from today's panel. Sam Ashworth-Hayes and Scarlett Maguire are still with me. Let's turn to you first. Sam, what's your impression about this bill? It has been months, not years, in the making, and it's finally been published. What are your first impressions?
Obviously, I was at Review when it was published, but from the sort of pre-release discussion, I'm not terribly impressed. I think the legal but harmful measures are a mistake. And I'm certainly surprised they've been put forward by a Conservative government, given that they would themselves seem to lean in a slightly left-wing direction. I think these are, if you describe content as harmful and your opponent's political narrative is largely based around describing your ideas as harmful, that seems to be a somewhat self-defeating measure, so possibly there could be something of an error there. In terms of the actual bill itself, the idea that you're going to imprison tech executives, I mean, look, these people are going to be in America, and if you pass this bill, they're certainly going to be in America. You won't be starting these companies in Britain. And you mentioned this idea that people don't like big tech. They don't like big tech, the name. They like Google. like using that, they like using Facebook, they like using Twitter, they like the products it gives you. So if you actually look at people's revealed preference, it's fairly almost libertarian in this sort of field. And I just worry that this is going to be something that basically stifles British innovation, stifles the British economy, and doesn't really end up being very effective.
And Scarlett, what's your view on this? Because clearly there's a lot of public pressure on this. People think that the internet is not safe enough.
No, I mean there's a real tension, isn't there, between safety and free speech, and one can talk about the under 18s. I mean, and particularly, the younger it gets, you have, dating apps which anybody can do. My mother's carer lost £100,000 to a Bitcoin ad on Google, right, that said Martin Lewis said it was all right. I mean, these sort of things, and that was her life savings. You just think, how can you deal with it? I would like to say to Sam that just because he doesn't like it doesn't mean it's left-wing.
There are lots of left-wing libertarians who oppose this bill. There are lots of those on the left who believe in freedom of expression.
Yes, most of us actually. But I think we have to be. I think we have to be very careful, and I think they haven't been careful enough, and they haven't seen. And I mean, of course, this ridiculous idea of jailing big tech people who won't even come here for a select committee. You must be kidding.
Wow. Well, on that, you've been watching The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, this hour. We're back in the next hour for so much more. The latest from Westminster will cross over again to Ukraine as well, and we'll speak to a chemical weapons expert on the horrific weapons that Russia has at its disposal. You won't want to miss it. But first, a short break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome back to this second hour of The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood. Now, my panel is still with me this hour, Director of Studies at the Henry Jackson Society, Sam Ashworth-Hayes, and former Labour advisor, Scarlett Maguire. This hour, we will discuss all of the latest news coming from Westminster with the MP Tom Hunt and the MP Christine Jardine of the Tories and the Lib Dems, respectively. We'll cross over to Kharkiv in Ukraine and speak to a journalist about the Russian assault on the city. That and so much more is coming up on this hour, but first, here are the headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 3 o'clock. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Dozens of sacked P&O ferry workers in Dover have clashed with motorists after blocking a road close to the port. They've stopped traffic and are holding up banners and flags saying "Stop the P&O Jobs Carve-Up." In the last few hours, the firm made 800 staff redundant with immediate effect after making losses of £100 million. Unions are advising their workers not to leave the ships. The RMT says they've received reports that security guards are trying to board ships at Dover to remove crew. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps says officials will be having urgent discussions with the firm. The UK says it will deploy its medium-range anti-air missile system to Poland as NATO moves to increase security along its eastern flank. During a visit to Warsaw, the Defence Minister Ben Wallace also confirmed Britain will be deploying 100 troops to the country. It comes as rescue workers continue to search for survivors after a theatre in the city of Mariupol was hit by an airstrike. The number of casualties is still unknown, but it's thought hundreds of people were sheltering inside at the time. Moscow has denied its involvement in the shelling.
I hope this sends a message to the Kremlin that don't doubt us for 1 second, that we will stand together, stand up for our values and defend our friends such as Poland from any further aggression.
The Kremlin says it will disregard the UN's International Court of Justice demand that Russia halt its aggression. Moscow says talks with Ukraine are continuing today via video link. It says NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg urged President Putin to pull back his forces to avoid more bloodshed.
NATO has a responsibility to prevent this conflict from escalating further. That would be even more dangerous and would cause more suffering, death and destruction.
The Ministry of Defence says the Russian invasion of Ukraine has largely stalled on all fronts. The latest intelligence update shows Russian forces have made minimal progress on land, sea and air and continue to suffer heavy losses. It adds the vast majority of Ukrainian territory, including all major cities, remains in Ukrainian hands. The Bank of England has raised interest rates from 0.5% to 0.75%. It comes ahead of an inflation hike expected next month, estimated to reach around 8%, which the bank warns could peak even higher later in the year. It was already set to be the biggest rise in 30 years. The British-Iranian charity worker Nazanin Zagari Ratcliffe has been reunited with her family in the UK. The 43-year-old was released from detention in Iran, where she'd been held for 6 years. Fellow British-Iranian Anousheh Ashuri was also released after being detained for nearly 5 years. Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng told GB News he's delighted she finally has her freedom back.
It does show that diplomacy can work. I think we worked very, very hard. The Foreign Office worked very hard. Liz Truss, I think, worked very hard. But beyond all of that, what she went through, I think, is unimaginable. I mean, to be in a prison in Iran, not knowing whether you'll ever be released, it must be an extraordinary thing that she suffered, and I'm delighted that she's back.
The BBC says it's reached a substantial settlement with Diana, Princess of Wales' private secretary, Patrick Jeffson. The broadcaster says it acknowledges serious harm was caused to Commander Jeffson as a result of the Martin Bashir Panorama interview in 1995. It says it apologises unreservedly to the commander and has paid a substantial sum in damages. And to the manor-born star, Peter Bowles has died aged 85. The actor played villains in several TV series, including The Avengers, becoming a household name as the archetypal English gent. But it was with a moustache alongside Dame Penelope Keith that he became most famous. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's return to the briefing with Tom Harwood.
Hello and welcome back to the briefing with me, Tom Harwood. Now, coming up this hour, we'll get the latest from Westminster with a Conservative and a Liberal Democrat MP. We'll also be discussing the ferry firm P&O halting services and making staff redundant. We will get the latest from a journalist in Kharkiv, Ukraine, a city which has been under heavy shelling from the Russians over the last few days. And yesterday, US President Joe Biden called the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin a war criminal. We'll speak to a warfare expert about the horrendous weapons that Russian forces have used in Ukraine. And of course, give me your political briefing. Send in your opinions and views by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk. I'll see if I can put any of your questions to our experts. Welcome to the show. Let's get straight into today's political roundup of the biggest stories. Joining me now, live from Westminster, is the Conservative MP for Ipswich, Tom Hunt. Welcome to the programme, Tom. I suppose one of the biggest stories coming out of the government today is this deal done, this deployment, I should say, of the Sky Sabre missile system to Poland, the Defence Secretary, of course, in that country at the moment. Are you supportive of the move?
Well, actually, coincidentally, I had a question yesterday in sort of Deputy Prime Minister's questions. I actually asked about Poland. One of the questions I asked was, the ways in which the government are supporting Poland, both in terms of the unprecedented refugee numbers they're receiving, but also in addressing Poland's own legitimate security concerns. So, as much as I'd love to think that this development is as a result of my question, I suspect it was already in the offing. But no, it's absolutely the right thing to be doing, and I think it has my full support.
Certainly, it does seem that there is a real show of strength now from the West against Vladimir Putin. I wonder, will he be paying attention to this, or is this more about ensuring that our allies, our NATO allies, not only in Poland, but also in those Baltic countries as well, feel like we have their backs completely?
Well, I think understandably those countries are probably more concerned and have been concerned for years. I remember I visited Estonia about 2 years ago. I was in Narva on the Estonian-Russian border, and there was a great anxiety there, and that was sort of 2 years ago. I can't imagine what it's like there now. But I think the Prime Minister was right to only a few weeks ago talk about this danger of any kind of potential normalisation. We really do hope that they can come to some kind of peace deal in the Ukraine to prevent the kind of suffering we're seeing at the moment. But what is clear is that whatever happens with regards to those negotiations, we can never, ever let any slippage towards normalisation. This must be the beginning of the end of the Putin regime. And we hope those negotiations result in an outcome which leads to no more Ukrainian people dying and no more suffering. But this must be the beginning of the end when it comes to a Putin regime. I think the Prime Minister is right to say that in 2014, the West made a grave mistake in not being more robust with Russia and Putin. We cannot have any slippage towards normalisation. So, yes, I am looking at those negotiations, hoping and praying that we get an outcome which prevents suffering. But we must not mean that means, but the message of Putin must not ever be this was a wise decision, his behaviour over the last few weeks. He must pay the ultimate price for the decision that he made 3 weeks ago to invade Ukraine. And we must not take our foot off his throat, metaphorically.
Certainly, and the Western sanctions that have been applied have been considerable. But I wonder, of course, as MP for Ipswich, a part of the world that has not always seen all of the benefits of our prosperity here in the UK, is there a worry that as the sanctions drag on, as the energy prices rise, as the price of food and other staples that people live by goes up, that there might be pressure to ease those sanctions? And how do we respond to that pressure?
I think right now, my constituents are very, very interested in what's going on in Ukraine, gravely concerned. Their hearts go out for people of Ukraine, and they are incredibly anti-Putin, as you can probably imagine. So I do believe that the bulk of my constituents believe that the right thing to do is to be robust and strong with Putin. Look, we know we have a cost of living crisis in this country. We can call it a crisis, we can call it something else, but it is a cost of living challenge that is affecting people up and down the country, and there's a number of different causes of that. The Prime Minister, he is showing that we need to have a proper energy policy, a proper strategy that, yes, has a roadmap towards cutting carbon emissions, but is a pragmatic roadmap, a roadmap that explores all many different types of alternatives. And I welcome what I've heard this week in terms of North Sea oil exploration. I think it's necessary for a Prime Minister to talk to whoever he has to talk to play a role in Europe becoming less dependent on Russian gas. So, of course, I appreciate that we're much less dependent on Russian gas than other European countries. We've got to play our role in trying to win those countries off it as well. So, I think we've got to, I don't think this is a choice. I think that, we've got to confront Putin. I don't think there is an option here which involves us not confronting him. And I think that, we're in a situation where, sadly, the global economy has has become slightly dependent upon Vladimir Putin. That must not be the case going forward. And I think countries such as Germany have made significant mistakes when it comes to their energy policy. But it's been welcoming to see that even the Green Party in Germany are becoming a bit more pragmatic with regard to nuclear energy. We need to keep our foot on Putin's throat when it comes to sanctions and on the throat of his cronies. And I think the vast majority of my constituents see the big picture here, and they know that this matters. They know this isn't just a conflict in a faraway country they've never been to. They feel what's happened immensely. The hearts go out for people of Ukraine, but I actually think most of them get the geopolitical significance of what's happened. And in the past, often when I've spoken about international affairs, I've got the sense that they'd rather talk about really, really localised issues. Of course, those issues still matter to them. Cost of living matters to them, but this matters to them as well. And I think that any right-thinking person, I think, can see that we need to ensure this is a beginning of the end of the Putin regime, and we cannot allow that creeping normalisation. There's a risk that could happen again. We cannot allow it to happen again.
It's interesting to hear that you, as a local MP, are getting so much correspondence from your constituents about this global issue. Sometimes people don't recognise that these issues really are at the core of our politics. But turning to more parochial matters, the Conservative Party is hosting a spring conference in Blackpool tomorrow and the next day. The Prime Minister will be addressing assembled delegates. He's in a much stronger position now than he was a few weeks ago. But what's the state of the Conservative Party? You're expecting a drubbing in the local elections in May, aren't you?
I hope we don't get a drubbing. We have a third of our seats up in Ipswich, and as you can probably imagine, I've been knocking on a lot of doors over the last few weeks. So we don't know how that election is going to go. I mean, we are a government. It is midterm. You don't expect to make strings of gains in local elections. You don't expect to make by-election gains when you're in government midterm. However, I would say the reaction on the doorstep has been pretty positive. So, let's see what the outcome is. I certainly don't feel any warmth towards the Labour Party. I think it could vary on where you are in the country what the results are. But I think we could do slightly better than expected. But I think the Conservative Party and the government is in a much better position than it was a few weeks ago. I think some of those colleagues of mine who did have significant concerns about the leadership have actually been quite impressed with the leadership that has been provided in the Ukraine over the last few weeks. I know I have been. And I think we're in an incredibly challenging situation. I do think something many of my constituents say about Boris Johnson is they just find it unbelievable how many massive things he's had to deal with since he became Prime Minister. It's Brexit, COVID, it's a war in Ukraine. And I think that along the way, the Prime Minister's made some mistakes, but I think he's got most of the big calls right. And I think a lot of my constituents see that, and actually they have some sympathy for the kind of things he's had to grapple with. And I think that, and that's kind of where I am, to be honest. And so the Prime Minister has my backing. And I think, these are midterm local elections. Like the Birmingham Edmonton by-election was a midterm by-election. Keir Starmer should be expecting big wins to kind of show that there's a chance that Labour might be able to win the next general election. We haven't been seeing those so far in blue-red contests. And perhaps we won't next in May, but time will tell. Time will tell.
I noticed, Tom Hunt, you said there in blue-red contests, because of course there's another colour on the political sphere at the moment, and surging have been the Liberal Democrats, who we'll be speaking to after you. So for now, thank you for joining us, Tom Hunt, and best of luck with what you're doing, knocking on all those doors in what I'm hoping is improving weather for all political parties.
It's been a lovely day.
Knocking on doors in December by-elections is a lot more horrible than as we get into the spring. Thanks for joining us, Tom Hunt.
Cheers.
Well, I mentioned those blue-yellow, or is it orange, contests that have been springing up, because the Lib Dems have made some considerable gains in not one, but 2 or 3 by-elections in recent months. Let's bring in the Liberal Democrat MP for Edinburgh West, Christine Jardine. Welcome to the programme. I suppose because we ended the last conversation on local elections, let's start this one on local elections. Are you expecting to do well?
Well, we're expecting to... we always work hard in local elections, and that is usually reflected in the results. And we would expect that this time. I don't quite agree with your previous caller when he said that, Boris has made all the right decisions and things have happened, but, that he's not responsible for. We're in a situation at the moment where the cost of living crisis could have been addressed better. we're in a situation where if we had paid attention to the warnings, or the government had paid attention to the warnings about London Grad, the amount of oligarchs in London, and about Lebedev specifically, then, you know, the situation we were facing might not be as difficult. Particularly now with the cost of living crisis, and what the Chancellor is suggesting is hiking up the cost of living for ordinary families with, national insurance increase, freezing the tax threshold, rather than take on perhaps a VAT cut that we've suggested from 20 to 17.5%, that would make around £600 a year difference to ordinary families. Now, I think that is what people will care about on the doorsteps. Yes, we all feel for Ukraine. Yes, we're all doing everything we possibly can. But that does not excuse the mistakes that this government and the Prime Minister in particular have made.
Is the risk with calling for a VAT cut, as the Chancellor has so far resisted in going down, is that a VAT cut would help those who spend the most, whereas something more targeted, like government spending, for example, might be able to target the help where it's most needed and not give big tax cuts to big spenders?
Well, we're actually calling for both, because we do believe that you have to target the help where it's needed. But in this situation, that what we can do effectively is reduce VAT, so that reduces the amount that ordinary families, to whom that spending is more costly, if you like. It's a bigger amount of their budget. We'll see the benefits. But yes, we need targeted help. Yes, we need the Warm Homes discount increase. We need more help for carers. All of these things we need. But the problem is that the government has been so slow in this, as in everything else, with the sanctions. They were terribly slow. They've been slow in COVID to react. They've been slow to react to the cost of living crisis. And what we're trying to do now is come up with solutions, which we have done, which will help people now, will take the pressure off their pockets, off their spending, and allow them to, be able to afford things like fuel, to be able to pay their gas bills, to not have to make the choice between feeding the children and keeping them warm.
I suppose that the big question moving on from this is, where does that leave us? The Chancellor potentially making some big moves when it comes to his budget. But the big news today is, of course, P&O ferries, with many job losses across the country. We're expecting a statement in the House of Commons in the next hour or so. What would you like the government to do with regard to those job losses?
I would like the government to take P&O into temporary control in the way that they have done in other situations, like they did with the main East Coast line, where they took it into government control. They've done it with various rail lines, and they did, I believe, with Flybe at one point. Now, the situation we have here is this is a threat to the working conditions of all these seafarers, of all seafarers. This is completely unacceptable, that they would be made redundant and other people brought in. We need to protect those jobs. We need to protect a company. P&O was actually set up by a Shetlander. Anderson, I think was his name, in the 1800s. And this is, a huge British company, and we should be doing what we can to protect it. It's not just a big company, it's a vital company. If you think about the routes that it runs, the links between us and Europe, where foodstuffs come across by ferry, the links to, Scotland and Northern Ireland. There's an awful lot of trade goes back and forward between Scotland and Northern Ireland, between Larne and Cairnryan. And it's vitally important. So I would like to see the government say, we will take this company into national control until we find a suitable owner.
Well, I suppose we do not have long to wait to see what the government will say, although I'm not sure. It's hard to know with this particularly unideological government as to whether it will go down the free market route or go into the government control route. I suppose we don't have long to wait.
This is not a situation, Tom, if you don't mind me saying, where we should be thinking about, is this ideology, is this free market? We have thousands of jobs at risk in what is currently a cost of living crisis. And what we need is the government to be prepared to act in a way that protects that company, that protects the supply chain, because P&O is vital to the supply chain, that protects seafarers' rights. And that's what we're looking for in the government in this. And we can't afford any more shilly-shallying and, waiting until, after things have happened, and, be dragged kicking and screaming to the right point by the country like they have been on refugees. We need the government to act quickly.
Well, not long to wait. For now, Christine Jardine, thank you for joining us this afternoon on The Briefing. Of course, we're expecting that government statement at the top of the next hour. Now, let's turn to another issue, the issue of Nazanin Zagari Ratcliffe, and whether or not, as we mentioned briefly in one of the previous interviews, that money should have been paid to Iran. Scarlett Maguire, your view on this. Should money have been paid to Iran in what was, the government insists, a parallel transaction, not one that is exactly involved?
And of course, we all believe the government on this one. Yeah, it was a debt. It was a debt that the government agreed that they owed Iran. Of course they should have paid it. What's so terrible is how long they took to pay it while this woman was locked up. And actually, she'll never quite recover. I mean, her life... I'm sure that it's wonderful that she's back, and she's back with her daughter. And I have to say, her husband, who has just played a blinder and deserves everything. But, you don't recover from what she's been through completely. It's going to, as people keep saying, this is the beginning of a journey. This government could have paid that money. It was owed to Iran. It's been owed for decades. There was no question about it. It was found by an international court, and actually, instead, we played politics for years.
Sam Ashworth-Hayes, your view on that, because there is a contestation here, which is that this was money that was dealt with, the transaction was with a previous regime before the Iranian Revolution. Does that hold water in your book?
So my understanding, and from memory, is that the position of the government has basically been that we will pay the money at some point, but we don't want to pay it to this current regime. We certainly don't want them using it in ways that we would disapprove of. I think something that's worth saying here in response to Scarlett is that we really do not want to set a precedent whereby we tell people that actually, if you take British citizens hostage, we are perfectly willing to pay £393 million to get them back. Oh, sorry, you want to?
But it was a debt. That's what... Of course, the Iranians behaved appallingly. It was a debt that we owed them, and we gave them the moral high ground.
I think the thing with this is you can have a debt that you aren't going to be paying until the conditions are met for it to be paid. To then sort of go back on this in exchange for getting someone back is setting a terrible precedent in terms of you don't negotiate with hostage takers, you don't negotiate with these regimes in this way.
Of course, what the government would say is that they have paid this money with lots of strings attached, that it has to be used for humanitarian purposes. I know the Americans last year weren't particularly convinced by that line from the government. Whether or not it is paid is currently a matter of state secret in terms of where that money might be going and what qualifies as humanitarian aid. But I suppose that's one for the history books to deal with. Coming up after the break, we will cross over to Ukraine and get the latest from the ground. But before then, a short break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and every weekday we bring you The Briefing live from 9:30 a.m. The stories, analysis and live debate that you need to hear.
Quite right, Tom, of course.
Was this something that had been considered at all? Difficult to answer.
Gas-guzzling helicopters circling. Noise is being made here. Joe Biden walking out. Thank you very much for joining us. Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, Monday to Friday, 9:30 a.m. on GB News.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties.
But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it, Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
Welcome back to The Briefing. Now back to Ukraine. The regional emergency services have said that at least 500 people have been killed in the city of Kharkiv since the Russian invasion began. Ukraine's second largest city, located to the northeast of the country, has been subjected to persistent bombardment from the ground and air by Russian forces for weeks, with schools, nurseries and hospitals all amongst the buildings being destroyed. Well, joining me now live from Kharkiv is Maria Adviva from the European Experts Association, a Ukrainian foreign policy think tank. Thank you so much for making the time to speak to us this afternoon. I know it must be an incredibly worrying time for you and your city. First of all, could you tell us just the very latest from what has gone on in your city?
Hello. The latest few days are very intense in terms of shellings. So there were no airstrikes in the city, but Russian troops constantly shell the city with multiple rocket system, and that means that during the day and during the night, especially some other residential area will be shelled, and there will be the houses that will be destroyed, and that means that if the building is destroyed, the nearby area is without heating, electricity, water. I have been to the metro station today, seeing that people are living there for 3 weeks now, and there were children, and it is heartbreaking to see these children sitting on the carpet in one of the corners in the metro station with some toys around. And I understand that they spend their days and nights not being able to go outside, and while their parents go out to get some food to bring it to the metro station. And this is very hard to see how these civilians are terrorized constantly in Kharkiv, and especially the critical situation is around the city. So the Russian troops are now on the north and northeast of Kharkiv, and they have control over some small towns outside of Kharkiv, which are completely blockaded. So there is no communication with that cities. There is no possibility to provide there any medical assistance, any supplies at all. So we will see there the same situation as we see now in Mariupol, which is in this blockade for more than 10 days now.
What's your estimate in terms of the population that has decided to stay versus those who have left? And I suppose it must be logistically difficult now to leave with much of the city surrounded. How does one make a decision like that?
It's. I have seen that many people have actually probably made the decision a week ago when the airstrikes started. So people understood that this is for long, and the city will not be rebuilt or will not return back to normal life even if the war stops right now, because the city center is completely destroyed. Many residential areas are in ruins. It means that even if now the Putin takes this decision and says that, okay, there's now a ceasefire, the city will not be able to resume normal life for a very long time, because there will be a need for just major reparations and rebuilding of the city. And that's why people decided to leave. I saw many cars going out of Kharkiv. There are still some roads that can be used for that. It is not safe because Russia does not stop bombarding, and one of the small towns outside of Kharkiv, through which actually this road goes from Kharkiv to Dnipro, it was bombarded this night, shelled this night, and 20 people were died who were living there. So it means that there is no safe way out of town, but then people take this risk to flee the city because they think that somewhere they will be in a more safe place. Still, there are so many people inside. They don't have possibility to flee, or they are old and they have no place where to go, or they do not want to stay somewhere in this uncertainty situation when they don't know what will happen in the future. For my house where I live, I would say that is less than one third of people is staying here from all people who were here before the war. So probably the numbers are approximately the same for the city. The official number was 600,000 people left Kharkiv using the railway station alone. And I think that there was a huge amount as well that left Kharkiv using their own cars. But it's hard to give any numbers now because there is an ongoing war happening right now here in the city.
It's so hard to assess. I have to ask you, Maria, how are you staying safe personally?
I do not feel safe because when every day gets worse and the city is becoming like a ghost town. When I go outside, I will see very few people on the streets, and you do not feel safe outside because of the constant shellings. So this is the constant situation of being in this stress or in the understanding that any moment something can come up and happen. But then I see my role is in documenting these war crimes, because what Russia does in Ukraine, these are war crimes. And I think that every voice of Ukrainians now to the international community asking for help to close the sky, to help us defend Ukrainian sky is important. That's why I take this chance and try to speak to the international audience and give this message, so they will put pressure on their governments and that this help will arrive sooner, because it will be inevitable. Putin is not going to stop in Ukraine if he will be led to do so. Now the Russian media are discussing that the next denazification should be done in Europe, and this is very close. I mean, they're very close to say that the next country, to name the next country where they will say that need to demilitarize and denazificate. And that's why it means that now it is the moment when Ukraine should be supplied of kind of defensive anti-aircraft weapons, so that by this we will defend not only our country but the Europe as whole.
Taking the time to spread that message here on GB News, and best of luck and stay safe while doing that incredibly important documenting work of what's going on there in Kharkiv in the middle of a war zone. Maria Adviva, thank you for joining us this afternoon on The Briefing.
Thank you.
Now, coming up next, we speak to a chemical weapons expert on the horrendous weapons which Russia has used and have at their disposal in Ukraine. But first, here are the headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 3:35. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Dozens of sacked P&O ferry workers in Dover have clashed with motorists after blocking a road close to the port. In the last few hours, the firm made 800 staff redundant with immediate effect after making losses of £100 million. The company also announced it was suspending voyages for the next few days. The Kremlin says it will disregard the UN's International Court of Justice demand that Russia halt its aggression. Moscow says talks with Ukraine are continuing today. It's as NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg urged President Putin to pull back his forces to avoid more bloodshed. Rescue workers continue to search for survivors after a theatre in the city of Mariupol was hit by an airstrike. The number of casualties is still unknown, but it's thought hundreds of people were sheltering inside at the time. A satellite image before the strike appeared to show the word children written in Russian on the pavement. Moscow has denied its involvement in the shelling. The Bank of England has raised interest rates from 0.5% to 0.75%. It comes ahead of an inflation hike expected next month, estimated to reach around 8%, which the bank warns could peak even higher later in the year. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Back to the briefing with Tom Harwood in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
Right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, Defence Secretary Ben Wallace announced that the UK was to deploy the Sky Sabre missile system in Poland, along with 100 troops to operate it. Speaking alongside his Polish counterpart, he pointed out that the system was the UK's newest medium-range air defence missile and said that he hoped this would send a message to the Kremlin that we will, quote, stand together, stand up for our values and defend our friends such as Poland from any further aggression. Meanwhile, back in Ukraine, officials have said that Russian forces have attacked a theatre sheltering civilians in a besieged city of Mariupol, and at least one person has died after the debris of a downed missile hit a residential apartment in the capital of Kyiv. Well, joining me to discuss all of this is former British Army officer and chemical weapons expert Hamish de Bretton-Gordon. Welcome to the programme. First of all, let's take a step back and let's look at some of the horrendous weaponry that Russia has been using. Some of these weapons that sort of suck the oxygen out of an area that seem to have been targeted at civilians.
Well, absolutely. From the sort of playbook, and as some of your viewers will be aware, I've been very close to the Russians. I've seen them up close in Syria for the last 6 years, where they've sort of been trialling all these dreadful weapons. The thermobaric bomb, the vacuum bomb that you've been describing is absolutely horrendous. It was designed to blow up minefields, not to blow up civilians. But as we're seeing in Ukraine, Putin and the Russians are trying to terrify the civilians into surrender, as they did in Syria. And the more horrific weapons you use, the more likely are they going to surrender. And this attack in Mariupol on the theatre you're just describing is absolutely classic Russian tactics. And I am trying to train Ukrainian civilians at the moment how to survive these horrendous weapons. Now, for one, sadly, writing children outside this theatre was probably the thing that got them attacked, because Putin and the Russians realised if they kill a whole load of children, that is going to terrify the Ukrainian population more than anything else, and probably trying to lead to their surrender. So, in future, although it seems absolutely intuitive to do that to protect them, one shouldn't do it. Equally, hospitals and schools that have been attacked. Now, in a conflict situation like this, the two sides share detailed grid references of where their special sites are, like hospitals, schools, churches, and mosques. Unfortunately, in Syria, whenever that happened, those figures would dial directly into Syrian and Russian targeting computers and then attacked. And I expect a similar sort of thing is happening here in Ukraine.
That is extraordinary, that writing the word children outside a place of shelter could well have been what got it attacked. It's just incredible. It's just almost impossible to imagine the barbarity. But as you say, this is not new. These tactics have been going on, particularly in Syria, with Russian involvement for some time. In your opinion, does that mean that other tactics that we saw in Syria, potentially even weapons of mass destruction, might they be used?
Tom, unfortunately, I think it is getting increasingly likely. The playbook that has been absolutely unfolding in Ukraine, so similar to Syria, that each time that you don't achieve your ends, you then escalate to the next level of dreadfulness. And I think the attack in Mariupol is just evidence of that. Now, we know that the Russians are completely bogged down in their attacks in Ukraine, and they haven't moved anywhere for days. This really concerns me. There are two options: either Putin sues for peace with the Ukrainian government, and we have a ceasefire, or he escalates. Unfortunately, the peace thing, I think, is just not going to happen. His mission is to take Ukraine. There's no way he's going to stop now and go. So the escalation to me is a huge concern. And the next thing that he would likely to do is use chemical weapons, because he's seen how effective they were in Syria. The 4-year conventional siege of Aleppo was broken in 13 days by the use of chlorine barrel bombs. And I think the Russians might go that way. We know they have chemical weapons. I'm talking to you from Salisbury, where Putin ordered a chemical weapons attack 4 years ago. I don't think they'll use what we call chemical warfare agents. I think they will use toxic industrial chemicals like chlorine. They've already been preparing the ground with these false flag accusations. And what I'm trying to do is to train civilians how to survive these attacks, because they are very survivable. But a lot of what you do is completely counterintuitive. In a chemical weapons attack, you should not go underground that you would do for a conventional high explosive attack. You need to go above ground. You need to get out of what we call the downwind hazard, the contamination. And you also need to decontaminate yourself as quickly as possible, which may be just taking your clothes off. So I am publishing online, doing loads of lectures and Zoom calls into Ukraine to try and get this information around, because I think if Putin knows that the Ukraine population will know how to react, therefore these dreadful weapons will be less effective, and hopefully then he won't use them. But we're at a pivotal stage, and I fear the future is going to be worse rather than better than what we've seen, and even what we've seen in Mariupol yesterday.
It's so fascinating and so important to say, because if I were attacked by chemical weapons, I think I'd probably get inside, put more clothes on, get underground. You're saying do exactly the opposite. What an important message to get out there to the people of Ukraine. I do want to ask you a question, though, about morale, about whether or not this Russian escalation, these barbaric attacks, these attacks that pretty clearly to many look like war crimes, the deliberate targeting of civilians, might that not backfire for President Putin? Might that not just unite further the Ukrainian people in their steely determination to kick him and his bullies out?
Well, Tom, I very much hope so. And, that is what we must do. I think Putin's greatest weakness is the Russian people. And Arnie Schwarzenegger has put a fantastic video on social media today, trying to get to them so that they are aware of the crimes against humanity, the war crimes that Putin is committing in their name. So hopefully that will galvanize the Russian people to get rid of him. But you're right, the support to Ukrainian people is absolutely key. Now, Maria, your previous speaker, and a whole bunch of people are talking about a no-fly zone. I shouted loudest for these in Syria, and I'm delighted that Ben Wallace is deploying Sky Sabre to Poland, but I would like to be more demonstrative. I think we should get on the front foot more, because at the moment Putin is calling all the shots. And if we could create a no-fly zone in Ukraine without putting British and American jets in their airspace, by using capabilities like Sky Sabre and other capabilities that we possess, and also giving this capability to the Ukrainians. Because as the president of Ukraine said, and as Maria said, if you close the skies, we are not going to see those dreadful attacks on Mariupol theatre aimed at children. And again, because Putin at the moment seems to think that he's got all the cards in his hand, we need to put the pressure on him, get on the front foot, make him make decisions. At the moment, he's 100% focused on Ukraine and nowhere else. We need to take his eye off the ball, and we need to drag him to the negotiation table to get some sort of peace. Otherwise, we're going to see more the Mariupol theatre in the future.
Well, Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, thank you very much for not only that incredible analysis, but also practical advice to people in terms of if they ever find themselves in a situation as ghastly as that of Ukraine. Really interesting stuff there. Thank you for joining us this afternoon on The Briefing.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Now, let's get some reaction from all of the issues we've been discussing today with our political panel. Sam Ashworth-Hayes and Scarlett Maguire are still with me. We've been having some emails in over some of those issues that we've been talking about, particularly on MP pay. People don't seem to be particularly happy with the notion that MPs should be in it for the money. Ron has emailed in to say if you give MPs a lot more money to try and attract the best people, you'll only get people interested in making money. Sam, what do you say to that?
I don't think it's a matter of getting people who are interested in making money. It's a matter of making sure we aren't ruling people out who are already making these incomes. I think the thing is, what sounds like a lot of money to you and to me is not necessarily going to be a lot of money to someone who's at the absolute top of their game. I think £80,000 puts you in the top of 5% of incomes. That's 1 in 20. These are 650 people who make policy for the entire country. So it really does pay to get the best people into those roles.
Well, Brian has written in to say that MPs' salaries should be halved. Scarlett, what do you make of that?
Absolutely not. No, I mean, I do agree with Sam. These people are important. They're making decisions about our country, about our government. I think around 80,000 is fair. I think they should be on. I think they should be above average. But I just think it's ridiculous if you have them on, say, 150,000. Then people really will be in it for the money. Whereas, I mean, for an awful lot of people, I mean, particularly Labour people, 80,000 odd is a pay rise. I mean, I know that there are a lot of Conservatives that it's a pay cut, and I think this is the problem. But no, not any lower. You've got to, I mean, actually, they do need to spend a lot of money.
But second jobs, it's an interesting issue because there are many MPs who over the last hundreds of years have been great authors, journalists, today broadcasters even. You know, David Lammy has his radio show. Should the Labour Party policy, as it stands, is to ban second jobs? Is that right?
It's difficult. I mean, it's always difficult, isn't it? Because is writing a book a second job? Although one has to say that our great Prime Minister has been given hundreds of thousands of pounds to not write a book that he hasn't quite written. I mean, crazy. But I mean, is that, you know, writing your memoirs that you then go... doing a radio show once a week is, I mean, I think
indeed,
it's
as many
difficult.
MPs are, for example, practicing GPs who sometimes host a surgery.
Yeah.
Other MPs might have been former public servants, and they like to sort of partake in that still a little bit. Doesn't that bring them closer to the people?
I don't think it brings them closer to the people. I think it means that you go on practicing what you want. But I mean, I know the argument is, oh well, you know, it does bring you closer. No, it doesn't. It just makes you earn more money. I mean, you know, why did Geoffrey Cox go on doing whatever he was doing for some terrible? I mean, it was against British taxpayers. We were paying Geoffrey Cox to oppose us, to stop us getting money. I mean, and he was earning hundreds of thousands of pounds.
Of course, he would deny that it was against British taxpayers, but he certainly was earning a hell of a lot of money there. Shall we move on to this issue of a no-fly zone? Because I think it's stark. Everyone that we spoke to in Ukraine, all of the Ukrainians that we've had on this programme over the last 2 hours, have been unanimous in their calls for a no-fly zone. And it is heartbreaking because, of course, the West has been united in saying that we can't do this, and yet that's all they're asking for. Sam Ashworth-Hayes, your thoughts?
So I think the problem with this is it obviously makes a lot of sense from the Ukrainian point of view to ask for this, although I would note that Ben Wallace, I believe, has pointed out that a no-fly zone strictly enforced, where there's no planes, no drones in the area at all, may actually do more harm than good to the Ukrainian cause because a lot of the shelling is happening via artillery, and of course we have these fantastic Turkish drones which are taking out columns of Russian transports and tanks. But the problem from the West point of view is basically that a no-fly zone isn't something you just declare, it's something you have to enforce. And to do this, you need to be able to put your planes in the air and have your anti-aircraft systems on the ground. And to have your planes in the air, you need to make sure they're not getting shot at by the other side's anti-aircraft. And they have batteries in Russia which can reach into Ukraine. So to impose a no-fly zone, the first thing you'd end up doing is striking targets in Russia and Belarus on the ground with your missiles.
I hadn't heard that particular element of it. Scarlett, your response there to the desperate calls of those people in Ukraine?
If we have a no-fly zone, we might as well go in. I mean, if frankly... I mean, that's why I sort of slightly worry about all this, oh my God, Ukraine, but we're not going to do anything. And I can understand the Ukrainians feeling totally betrayed. But there is no question, if it's a no-fly zone, we are declaring war on Russia. End of.
I suppose we can continue with these sanctions, we can continue with supplying the wonderful NLAW weapons that take out tanks. Allegedly, apparently, Ukrainian soldiers shout "God save the Queen" when they fire British NLAWs. I'm not sure if I believe that one, but it certainly was reported in the press. Well, anyway, moving forward now to Belarusian journalist Hanna Liabaukova, as she joins us from Vilnius in Lithuania. Welcome to the programme. First of all, Belarus appears to have become this sort of puppet state of Russia. What's it like being a journalist reporting in a country that seems to be playing second fiddle to that large dictatorship?
Well, first of all, Belarus not only became a puppet state, Belarus actually, Lukashenko actually gave away part of our sovereignty, firstly in the military sphere, because now Russians are basically deciding what to do and how to attack Ukraine from the territory of our country. Then in the sphere of national security, because, well, Lukashenko cannot even control the information security sphere because Russian propaganda is feeling pretty well in Belarus at the moment. And the third part is basically foreign policy, because, well, Lukashenko is not deciding on our foreign policy at the moment. So these are the most important signs of Lukashenko giving away the sovereignty of...
I have a little problem with the line all the way there from Lithuania. Let's see if we can persist. I think that might be I think that might be it for the line. That is a shame, but it is fascinating to hear about the situation in Belarus as well. I'm afraid we're running to the end of the programme now. If in 5 seconds, Scarlett Maguire, you have something to add on the situation in Belarus.
Well, it's horrendous. I mean, how living in Belarus is like living in Russia at the moment. It's
almost like they've become the same country. It's remarkable.
Yeah, but I mean, actually, it's been awful for an awful long time. I mean, years and years, Belarus has been run by a tyrant.
I'm afraid we've run to the end of the programme. You've been watching The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood. I'm back tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. But next up, it's Colin Brazier.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update. Plenty more spring sunshine to come over the next few days, but the nights are still just longer than the days, and certainly long enough for a touch of frost overnight under largely clear skies. High pressure is dominating. We do have this weakish weather front that's been drifting across northern Britain through the day, bringing a few showers, but it is fading away. We'll keep 1 or 2 showers going across the Western Isles, the Northern Isles, and maybe a few across the Highlands through the evening, but generally they're fading away, and certainly showers elsewhere dying out, and it's going to be a largely dry and clear night, and we will see that frost forming across northern Britain. Further south, it's fog that's likely to form, and it could be quite dense in places, and it may last for much of Friday morning. So certainly through the morning rush hour, some fog over parts of the Midlands, Wales and southern England. Further north, a bright start, a cold start, yes, but plenty of sunshine. And further south as well, the mist, low cloud and fog should be gone, certainly by late morning, and then it's sunny spells pretty much across the board. Temperatures will respond to that sunshine as well. Look at this, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 is possible. A little cooler with the breeze across the northwest. That breeze will strengthen further during Friday evening, and the breeze just starting to pick up across southern parts as well. Again, with clear skies, it will turn quite cold through Friday night, but not as frosty because there will be more of a breeze, and that should just about keep the temperatures a touch above freezing. Saturday is another sunny day. There will be a noticeable wind across the south of England, South Wales and Western Scotland and Northern Ireland. But in the sunshine, again, temperatures getting up to 14, 15, 16 degrees Celsius, feeling pretty pleasant if you can get out of that breeze on